Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 26, and we're going to talk about public schools in major cities in America. We're going to talk about Jaime Escalante, and we're going to talk about the poor who have to live in these cities and go to really underperforming public schools. So last episode, we talked about the ending of affirmative action here in America. I thought it was only relevant to schools and entrance to schools, but apparently it has a very, very wide application, even to companies and their hiring decisions and processes, that you cannot have quota systems anymore. If you want more a legal explanation of the affirmative action, you might want to listen to Robert Barnes. He's a constitutional lawyer who wins most of his cases that he has when his clients are suing the United States. I think his winning percentage is something like 50%, which is like astronomical. Consider it like a baseball average, batting average. It's just tremendous how often he wins. He did an interview with George Gammon. They worked together a lot, and he had a breakdown of a lot of the Supreme Court decisions that came down last week. It's worth a listen. I never realized just how far-reaching and how many implications and related situations there are with some of the Supreme Court decisions. But having made those decisions, a lot of people might be worried about all of the kids who have to go to these schools in the city, public schools, and perhaps the possibility of them going to college after graduation. And I briefly mentioned it, that this problem is the schools themselves. They're poor performing public schools, and yet they remain open. Most teachers do not like to think of their school as a business. However, it is a business. Just like churches are a kind of business. People don't like to think of it as a business, but let's be frank, right? They need money to operate. And so how do you balance the job that you're supposed to fulfill and make money at the same time? They're called nonprofit because supposedly the goal is not to build a profit. And if you do have any profit, so-called, then what is it going to be used for? Right? Is it going to be used to enrich investors, or is it going to feed back into the schools? But in any case, that's a different conversation. But schools are a type of business. And so the employees would be the teachers, the principal, and everyone else who's related to the school superintendent. But the students then would be the customers, right? And what's really interesting is that in a lot of cities, even until recently, we'll talk about some of the adjustments that people have tried to make, but essentially public schools are regional monopolies, right? If you live in that district, then you have to go to that district or that county, that township's high school. And you can't go to another high school, even if another high school is physically closer. You have to go to your district's high school. Even if the other high school is better, you're not allowed to go to it. You have to go to your assigned school. And so basically it's a monopoly, right? So it is a business. Students are required to go. And if they don't go, the families are fined. They're punished for not making sure that their kids go to school. And so these are called truancy laws. A lot of students, when I bring this up in class, they're surprised because they thought that these truancy laws were meant to inspire students to go to school. But really what they are protectionist laws, laws which protect the schools to force kids to go to school even when they don't want to, right? So if you think of it this way, if you are a store and no one wants to shop at your store, so you have the government pass a law which forces everyone to do their shopping at your terrible store, well, then not a lot of people will be happy, right? And that basically is what a school is. And so here's a business, they're offering a service, no one likes it. People hate it so much that no one learns how to read, no one does math. Teachers are, a lot of them, they get into teaching because they're excited, then they get thrown into meat grinder, which is the public school, and so they get jaded, they kind of leave. The turnover rate apparently is very high in a lot of these public schools. So they're monopolies and they exploit their customers, and that would be the students. And so even though they are not really teaching any longer, teachers get paid their full amount, right? There's no performance review. There's no dock in pay. Like no one is penalized in their salary because the number of students who can't read has increased. I mean, there's none of that. Dropout rates are very high, but it doesn't matter. Teachers still get paid. They're still given raises. They're still given tenure. They're still given promotions. And so it's the students that are exploited, right? They get no benefit, and yet they are forced to go so that teachers will get paid. Now, the solution is just simply school choice. You allow students to choose the school that they want to go to. Now, how are they going to do that? Well, one way that has been suggested, and it has been tried, that instead of the government money going directly to the school based on attendance, and that's why schools are really, really careful about taking attendance at their schools, because they get money by the students, right? By how many students show up to the school, they get a certain amount of money. That's why truancy laws are there, to force kids to go to school so that the schools can get paid. But if you get rid of, instead of sending the money directly to the school based on the attendance, you give the money to the families, right? And they just basically cash the check at the school of their choice. Then schools are going to fall over themselves trying to offer the best curriculum, the best teachers, the best education. And so you will see some improvement that way. Schools will then seek to innovate, and their methodology will be counted as successful by how well they can seek employment outside after high school, whether they get accepted into college after high school. You know, you can tell by those results whether a school is doing it well or if they're not doing it well. And you don't have to wait years. You begin to see results very, very quickly. Some people want to say that it's a money thing, that since school budgets are based on the tax base of the district, poor neighborhoods have a poorer tax base, and so they can't afford a better school program. And that is basically not true. And the reason is because if there is a shortfall, the government gives them subsidy, they give them extra money, so that even though no one is paying taxes, and so there are no school taxes in the neighborhood, the government is going to give them money, right? So one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, the budget for each student in that district is $30,000 per year, right? So the government will give $30,000 per student to this district, and it is still one of the worst performing districts in the country. I asked students to try to guess what district that is, and eventually they realized that it is Washington, D.C., the only school district in the entire country that is controlled directly by the federal government, which means, of course, they have they have access to the checkbook. And so whenever the superintendent or the teacher say, we need more money, they cut a new check. And so eventually it has come up to $30,000 per student, and they still have the worst testing score, among the worst, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to get worse than the worst, right? So I'm sure there are many, many schools that are equally bad, but because their budget is the highest, they get top honors. All right, so it's not necessarily a money thing. There's a wealthy neighborhood around me, and I heard that when Washington, D.C. was getting $30,000 per student. This district was paying 7 or 8,000 per district, and it's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in this area. So it's not a money thing. So teachers say that they're paid too little, but you can crunch the numbers, and if you include the benefits package and the pension package, they're paid actually pretty well. Plus, who says that teachers are paid too little? Well, it would be the teachers themselves, right? They have access to the students who they know are going to grow up into adults. And so they keep feeding them the line, oh, we're underpaid. That might be true. Okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. So how much is enough for a teacher? And I'll ask students, is $100,000 too little? And some of them will be surprised, but they'll say, well, if a teacher is good, sure, why not pay them $100,000? Because a lot of teachers, if they work for like 20, 30 years, they're making over $100,000, right? So then I'll say, how about $500,000? And then people start laughing at me. They'll say, no, that's too much. So then I said, oh, that's too much. What about 10 million? And they're like, well, we said 500,000 was too much. So why are you going to 10 million? And I said, well, if we lived in a world where government does not control the schools, that rather you have competition among the schools, right? Because they're businesses. And so you're competing against other schools to offer the best program. And you didn't have a limit on how many students you can teach, right? Because if a good business, if they have more customers, you expand. And so if you are a really creative teacher, how much could you make? And a lot of people, I lost them at 500,000. And so when I say $100 million, they lose it, right? They just laugh at me. But there's a video, John Stossel made a video, and it's Government-Run Schools Crush Innovation. At the very end of part 1, he finds a Korean teacher in Korea where he says that his annual revenue is $100 million. He's a high school teacher. If I knew how he did it, I'd try to do it instead of making podcast audio video recordings, but there it is. And so if you could make $100 million. But what do we do in America? Well, that's now where we're going to bring up Jaime Escalante. Jaime Escalante taught himself English. He was, I think he was a math teacher in Bolivia, came to the United States, taught himself English, and decided that he was going to teach math at the local high school in LA. There's a movie about his life. It's called Stand and Deliver. Edward James Olmos plays Jaime Escalante. You might have seen the movie, but in any case, the school is about to lose its accreditation. Oh, Jaime Escalante himself said that the movie is 90% true, 10% drama. And so some of the details are wrong. But if you go by his life, he starts teaching at this school. A lot of people are worried because the school's about to lose their accreditation. And so he says, why don't we teach calculus? And everyone's looking at him like he's crazy. These students, it's a predominantly Hispanic school in East LA, and it's a typical public school life, right? Everyone's dropping out, no one's going to class, and you have discipline problems, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, well, if we teach calculus, then, we could keep our accreditation. So the movie sped up the timeline, but within like a year or two, after teaching algebra, getting students up to speed, he had them taking calculus. And not only were they taking calculus, which is college level math, but they were taking the AP test at the end of the school year, advanced placement. If you pass that AP test, you get college credit. And it means that you'll probably do well in college. And so the first year, a couple students take it, they take his class, they take the AP test, and most of them passed. And so they all go on to college. And so word gets around, it gets to be 18 students, then 33 students, and then I think the last couple of years he taught at that school, I think it was Garfield High School. He had something like 300, 500 students, some ridiculous number of students, right? So everyone wants to take a class with Jaime Escalante. So what did the school do? Did they start paying him $100 million? Yeah. No, this is America. This is not how we roll in America. In America, we fire Jaime Escalante because he's making all the other math teachers look bad. Yes, that's what happened. He starts getting hate mail because he's coming to school too early. He's staying too late. He's teaching extra. He's doing all this extra work. He's got all of these students, right? So he had like 50 students in his class, and the max was supposed to be 35. So he's breaking all the union rules because he wants to teach. And all these kids are going to college. Even the kids who don't pass the AP exam, they go on to college, and they do quite well in college as well. And so you have, it's success no matter how you look at it, right? And so other teachers start getting jealous. They start hating on him, and so they get him fired. That's America, where when someone does something well and someone does something right, you get fired, right? Where students are learning, they're getting excited about education again. They're beginning to see all of these creative applications of the stuff that they're learning. Yeah, no one wants that, right? And so all of this stuff about caring about the poor in inner city, all that stuff, hogwash, right? Most of it is just this virtue signaling, what they hear other people doing, but they don't actually ever get to the point where they're going to do something effective. And when someone actually does do something effective, they get rid of them, right? So I thought I would talk about that. Also, what I'm going to do from now on is, instead of trying to further simplify and get everything I need to say in these short episodes, I'm only going to try to focus on one topic. And so that's the topic for this episode. So I will see you in the next one.